All right, buckle up because today we're diving into some seriously potent strategy
Oh,
with Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power,
okay.
specifically Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary.
It's a masterclass in strategic patience, really.
Hmm.
This law is all about understanding that sometimes the most effective way to gain control is by appearing to relinquish it.
Okay, so how does that work exactly? Greene uses a historical example that I have to admit sent chills down my spine when I first read it, the downfall of Napoleon orchestrated by his own former foreign minister Talleyrand.
Ah, Talleyrand.
Yeah.
A master strategist if there ever was one.
Right.
This story perfectly illustrates the power of understanding human psychology and using it to your advantage.
Okay.
See, we often think of power as this assertive force, right? Like the first one to make a move holds the power.
Right, like the classic chess analogy.
Exactly. But Talleyrand, he was playing a different game entirely.
Oh.
He understood that sometimes the most powerful move is actually inaction, or at least the appearance of inaction. It's about setting the stage, laying the trap, and letting your opponent's own ambition lead them right into it.
So set the stage for us. We're talking post-Napoleon's first exile, right? Give us the historical rundown.
Picture this. 1814, the Congress of Vienna European powers are gathered after Napoleon's first exile to Elba, this tiny island off the coast of Italy. Now, you got to remember, this is Napoleon Bonaparte we're talking about. The man was practically a legend in his own time. Everyone at this Congress, they're on edge, wondering if the caged lion is about to break free.
I bet the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Oh, absolutely. You've got leaders like Alexander I of Russia outright threatening to loose the monster if he doesn't get his way in the negotiations. Everyone's expecting fireworks. But then there's Talleyrand, cool as a cucumber, almost as if he knows something they don't.
Which, spoiler alert, he
Yeah.
totally does.
He does indeed. See, while everyone else is busy reacting to the ghost of Napoleon, Talleyrand's already thinking 10 steps ahead. He recognizes the real danger isn't Napoleon salting on some island, it's Napoleon unleashed. Talleyrand knows that a wounded, desperate Napoleon is the biggest threat to the New World Order they're trying to build.
Okay, so Talleyrand sees the bigger picture. But what's his play here? How do you go about manipulating someone like Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who, by all accounts, was brilliant and ambitious in his own right?
That's the beauty of it. Talleyrand understood that you don't defeat someone like Napoleon head-on. You use his own strengths against him.
Yeah.
Remember Napoleon's out on Elba, stripped of his empire, playing king of a glorified sandcastle? It was a calculated humiliation.
I mean, I get why they did it, but you'd think that would be enough to break a man, right?
You would think,
Ah.
but not Napoleon.
Yeah.
He craved power, craved the battlefield, craved the adoration of his people. And Talleyrand, he knew this. So he starts subtly planting seeds, letting information slip through diplomatic channels, hinting that the French people long for Napoleon's return.
Wait, so he straight up lied to Napoleon?
Not quite. It was more like curating the truth. He made sure Napoleon heard whispers of support, stories of discontent, even orchestrated a visit from Austria's General Koller, who subtly hinted that Europe might not be entirely opposed to his return.
He was playing mind games on a grand scale. This is incredible.
It is, isn't it? And here's where Napoleon, blinded by his own ambition, takes the bait. He sees this as his chance, his grand return to power. And why wouldn't he? It's exactly what he wants to believe.
So he escapes from Elba, launches the 100 Days War, and we all know how that ends.
Indeed, Napoleon marches right into Talleyrand's carefully laid trap. He gets his war, but it's a war he cannot win. And all because Talleyrand understood that sometimes the most effective way to control the game is to let your opponent think they're holding all the cards.
Okay, I'm officially mind blown. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how this all went down, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dissect Talleyrand's masterful manipulation and break down exactly how this seemingly hands-off approach actually secured his victory. All right, so we're back. We just left off with Napoleon fueled by Talleyrand's carefully placed whispers, making his daring escape from Elba. Now I'm dying to know, how did Talleyrand actually orchestrate his downfall? It still feels like we're missing some pieces of the puzzle.
Well, think about it this way. Talleyrand knew that a direct confrontation with Napoleon would be disastrous. Napoleon was a military genius, beloved by his troops. Directly opposing him would be like bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Okay, so a more subtle approach was needed. But how do you subtly defeat someone who commands armies?
You let them defeat themselves, or at least you create the conditions for their downfall. Napoleon, for all his brilliance, had a fatal flaw: his ambition. He was blinded by his desire for power and glory, and Talleyrand exploited that masterfully.
So how does Napoleon's return play into Talleyrand's plan? I mean, it seems like Napoleon returning to France would be a major setback.
Ah, but that's the brilliance of it. Remember, everyone's terrified of Napoleon regaining his former glory. So when he escapes Elba and reclaims the throne, all of Europe unites against him. They declare him an enemy, raising armies and forming alliances they might have hesitated to create otherwise.
So Talleyrand essentially used Napoleon's return as a rallying cry to unite all of Europe against him. That's some next-level strategy.
Exactly, and it gets even better. Napoleon convinced he has the support of the French people. Remember those whispers Talleyrand planted?
Right.
He's now leading a demoralized, undersupplied army to a war. He can't win against the united front that Talleyrand himself helped to create.
Wow, talk about setting the stage. It's like Talleyrand knew exactly how each piece on the board would move before the game even began.
Precisely. And remember that quote we mentioned earlier from the diplomat who witnessed this whole affair? He has set the house ablaze in order to save it from the plague. Talleyrand recognized that sometimes you have to create a controlled crisis to achieve a greater good. He let Napoleon think he was regaining power, but in reality, he was walking straight into a carefully constructed cage.
So if we're looking at this through the lens of Law 8, the bait was this illusion of support, this idea that Napoleon could reclaim his former glory, and the trap was the united front of European powers ready to crush him the moment he stepped out of line.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that Napoleon, convinced of his own genius, never even realized he was being played. He believed he was acting of his own free will, but in reality he was dancing to the tune of Talleyrand's carefully orchestrated plan.
Okay, so this Napoleon-Talleyrand showdown is a pretty extreme example of Law 8 in action. But how does this law play out in, say, less world-altering scenarios? Give us another example.
All right, let's shift gears from the battlefields of Europe to the high-stakes world of 19th century finance. Ever heard a guy named Daniel Drew?
Can't say that I have. Was he a Wall Street tycoon or something?
Oh, he was more than that, Jor. Daniel Drew was a master manipulator, a financial predator, who used Law 8 to amass a fortune. And his preferred hunting ground was the New York Stock Exchange.
Okay, now this, I've got to hear, break it down for us. How did Daniel Drew use Law 8 to conquer Wall Street?
Well, he understood a fundamental truth about human psychology. People are drawn to secrets, to the allure of inside information, of getting an edge in a game they barely understand. And Drew, he was a master at exploiting that weakness.
So he was working with insider trading. Was that even illegal back then?
Their lines were a little blurrier in those days, let's
Yeah.
just say that. But Drew's tactics were more nuanced than just straight-up insider trading. He understood the power of whispers, of rumors, of creating the illusion of knowledge.
Okay, so how did that work exactly? Give us a play-by-play.
Imagine this. You're a stockbroker in the late 1800s, and you see Daniel Drew, one of the most powerful financiers of the era, rushing through your exclusive club, clearly on his way to make some big moves on Wall Street. What are you thinking?
If I'm that stockbroker, I'm thinking, whatever that guy's about to do, I want in on it.
Exactly. And as if on cue, Drew would accidentally drop a piece of paper, seemingly a note containing insider tips on which stocks were about to skyrocket or plummet.
Yeah.
You can bet those brokers pounced on that information like sharks in a feeding frenzy.
So they buy or sell based on this insider information, and I'm guessing that plays right into Drew's hands.
You're catching on. See, this wasn't just clumsiness on Drew's part. It was a calculated manipulation. By planting this false information, he created a self-fulfilling prophecy. The brokers, believing they had a hot tip, would drive the market in the direction Drew desired, allowing him to buy low and sell high.
It's like he turned the entire stock market into his own personal chessboard.
And he did it by understanding the power of bait, by giving people the illusion of control, of having access to secret knowledge. They thought they were getting one over on the system, but in reality, they were dancing to the tune of Daniel Drew's carefully orchestrated manipulations.
That's incredible. It just goes to show that Law 8 isn't just about manipulating kings and emperors. It's about understanding the levers of power in any situation.
Precisely. And speaking of manipulating information, remember we talked about the Russo-Japanese War?
Right.
Well, that's another fascinating example of how a seemingly weaker opponent can use Law 8 to their advantage. You know, it's like the saying goes right, never underestimate the underdog.
Yeah, those unexpected wins, those are always the most satisfying to read about. But how did they actually do it? How did Japan use Law 8 to topple a giant like Russia?
Well, they knew that a direct assault on the Russian fleet would be a disaster. So they did something very clever. They used Russia's own size against them.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So picture this. The Russian fleet is massive, right?
Right.
And to get to Japan, they have to sail halfway across the world. This is back in the early 1900s, remember? So this journey, it's a logistical nightmare. Makes them incredibly vulnerable.
So you're saying the bait wasn't a rumor or a piece of paper this time, it was the war itself.
You got it. The Japanese, they knew that Russia wouldn't back down from a fight. They were too proud their history wouldn't allow it. So Japan, they basically set the stage for the fight to happen on their terms at a time and place of their choosing.
Wow, talk about strategic thinking. It's like they engineered the entire situation to expose Russia's weaknesses.
Exactly. And they didn't stop there. To really stack the deck in their favor, the Japanese started spreading misinformation. False reports about the size of their own forces, their movements, all designed to make the Russians second-guess themselves.
So it's like that honeyed bear trap again, right? The bait this time was false intel, luring the Russians right into a strategically disastrous
You're
position.
getting it. By the time the Russian fleet finally limped into the Sea of Japan, they were exhausted, demoralized, undersupplied. And the Japanese. They were waiting right where they wanted them, fresh and ready to strike.
And the result?
A decisive Japanese victory. One that sent shockwaves across the world. It just goes to show that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's strategy. It's patience. It's using your opponent's strengths against them.
And that's the beauty of Law 8, right? It's not just some ancient strategy for kings and emperors.
Yeah.
It's a blueprint for understanding the dynamics of power in any situation, even in our own lives.
Absolutely. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves rushing into things, charging head first, without really thinking things through?
Oh, all the time. Especially when I feel like I'm in the right,
Of course.
Yeah.
But sometimes the smartest move is to take a step back, to observe, to strategize. Instead of forcing the situation, why not create the conditions for the other person to come to you?
Okay, so it's like we've been saying all along, set the table so well they can't help but pull up a chair.
Exactly. And you know what? It doesn't have to be about manipulation or trickery. It's just about understanding what the other person wants and finding a way to align those wants with your own goals. It's win-win thinking.
I love that. And the best part is you don't have to be some kind of master manipulator to use Law 8. It's all about being observant, being patient, and choosing your battles wisely.
Precisely. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait. Let the other person's impatience, their need for control, work in your favor.
This has been incredible. I'm already seeing the world in a whole new light. Like, we've unlocked a secret level of strategy.
Hmm.
But if I'm being honest, it's a little intimidating, too. It's a lot to process.
It is. And that's just one of the 48 laws. There's a whole world of strategy out there waiting to be explored.
Well, I guess we'll just have to dive back in another time then, right? There's always more to learn.
Always. But for now, let's leave our listeners with this challenge. Take a look at the different areas of your life. Where could you benefit from a little Law 8 strategy? What subtle shifts could you make to tip the scales in your favor? Remember, knowledge is only powerful when it's applied.
So go out there and use this newfound knowledge wisely, ethically, and of course, strategically. Until next time, happy strategizing, everyone.